This lesson is on learning how to do order of operations on your TI-84 or your graphing calculator. Now think back to Algebra 1 or pre-algebra, you learned about PEMDAS. And if you remember, PEMDAS stood for order of operations of any kind of expression. The P stood for parentheses, E stood for exponents, M stand for multiply, D stood for divide, and A stood for addition, and S of course stood for subtraction. What's nice about doing it on the graphing calculator is you don't really need to know all that. If you look at the first question here, the first one we want to enter on our calculator is, if we were to do this by hand or in our heads, order of operations says we first need to take care of the parentheses, so we take 3 minus 5, which is negative 2. Then the next part, there's no exponents, so then we go to the multiplying or the dividing part, and you see that 8 divided by 2 is 4, so we change that. And really what we're doing is to making this all an addition and subtraction problem, adding and subtracting them all up, and we get our answer. A lot quicker way is just simply entering it on your calculator. So if you notice, it starts off with a negative 4. Now, the key thing you have to remember when doing this on your calculator is knowing the difference between the minus sign down here and the negative sign on your calculator. This stands for negative 4, so we're going to press the negative button, which is actually right next to the period here, right by enter. So press negative 4. We're just going to enter in as it sees on our line here. So 8 divided by 2 minus 6 plus 9 parentheses 3 minus 5, it's not negative, it's minus, times 6 and then minus 15. Okay. Again, reinforcing the difference between the negative and the minus sign. Most likely what you'll see is a difference between the length of it. Notice how here it's a little bit longer than the negative sign out here. Normally your minus sign's longer than the negative, so that's something to remember. All you need to do is simply press enter, and we get our answer of negative 129. So if you have a graphing calculator, be sure to try this, see if you get the same answer. Let's take a look at the second one. The second one's a little bit different. We have a couple extra things here. We have a square root, and we also have an exponent now. Okay. Whenever you're doing square roots, now this is the difference between some of the calculators that have a newer operating system and some of them that have an older, and it really depends on what you get. The first thing obviously you notice is there's a negative sign in front, so we want to press the negative button, which is again over here. And now we want to find the square root. How do I access square root? Well, if you notice right above the x squared button right here, you see this little blue radical sign that stands for square root. To access it, you have to press the second key to access any of the blue options on your calculator. So if you press second x squared, you'll see that the square root pops up. Some of your calculators might look different at this stage. This is under the newer operating system. So what's nice about this is that anything underneath the square root, it groups automatically instead of using parentheses. Some of you might see a parenthesis pop up with that. Okay, if you see a parenthesis, that means when you type things in, like 3 plus 6, okay, you want to close that parenthesis before you begin the next part. Now notice how over here, the 3 plus 6 was the only thing underneath the square root. This minus 7 part is actually outside of it. If you kept going with this would actually keep everything underneath the square root, and that would be incorrect. So what you in fact need to do is, once you've closed the parentheses or you're done typing in everything underneath the square root, click right so that it gets the cursor outside of that square root part. Okay? Then we can continue on writing the rest of it. So minus 7 plus 8, caret key to raise anything to the power, and the caret key is right underneath the clear button. Now again, here's the difference between those who have the new operating system and those who have the old operating system. If you press the caret key, under the new actually raises the power under your calculator page. Okay? Some of you will see a little caret key like this pop up. Okay? And the important part is that you put that in parentheses. If you see that pop up as a caret key, make sure you put that in parentheses. Okay? Of 3 or 5 times 3 power. I don't necessarily need parentheses here because I have the newer operating system, but I'm showing you that if you have that caret key symbol pop up on your screen and you're raising 5 times 3 power altogether, you need to group that in parentheses. Okay, makes sense? And again, press enter. We get our answer. This is a huge number. Now one thing we will note, and we'll probably come back to this later in Algebra 2, but this little e, if you ever see that e there, it really means times 10 to the 13th power. So this is kind of in scientific notation here. It just really means it's an extremely large number. Okay. Let's look at the very last one. Okay, I'm going to show you two ways on how to do the last one. Those who have the older operating system and those who have a newer operating system. If you have the newer operating system, what's really nice feature is if you press alpha y equals, which is you're accessing the F1 part of it, you'll see this pop up. This allows you to do fractions on your calculator. It's a very nice feature to have. And if you don't have that, I'll show you here in a little bit on how to do the same problem. If you press enter, it actually automatically sets up the fraction for you. So on top, if you notice, it starts off with -4, +7, -3, and again raised to the 4th power. Now here I want to get out of that power part, so just like with the square root, I need to click right to get down below again on that main line, and the rest of it is parentheses 2 + 6. Okay, we don't want to press enter yet because we haven't done the bottom part, so simply to get to the bottom you just press the bottom arrow, and here we just simply have parentheses 3 - 7 times 2 + 5 in parentheses, just like this. You can press enter, or you can press right to make sure you're cleared on the, double check to make sure it's the same on top and bottom. And if we press enter, we get our answer. Okay, this leaves it as fraction form. One thing you'll have to do is change it. If you notice on your pretest, you had to leave it in fraction form. This was already left in fraction form. If it's in decimal, okay, I'm going to show you what it looks like. If you go to the math button, you can change this to decimal by going to number 2. This changes it to decimal, this arrow decimal key. If you press enter, that's the decimal. So if you got the decimal, it probably popped up like this. Now again, to do the reverse, to change it back to fraction, one key thing you need to do is press the math button. Okay, and notice how it's arrow fraction option. So if you press enter on the arrow fraction and press enter one more time, it'll change it into the fraction for you. Okay, and that was one thing you had to do on the pretest, so just remember that. Okay, now the other part of doing this, if you have the older operating system, you won't have that nice feature of the F1 dividing part right here. Okay, what you will need to do is actually group the top part in parentheses before you divide. Yeah, I would do this step by step. So we do the top part first, so parentheses -4 + 7 -3 to the 4th. Okay, and some of you might have that caret key feature to the 4th. Okay, and just make sure you group the second part in parentheses and close that set of parentheses. And actually, we need to close the first set of parentheses that we started with, so that's grouped all together. Then we can press our divide, and now here we want to group the bottom part. In the bottom part, starting with the parentheses, we actually need to include a couple more sets of parentheses. So parentheses 3 - 7, and some of you I know can do this in your head and make little shortcuts here, which is fine. Parentheses 2 + 5 in parentheses, and then we need to group that bottom part in parentheses, so the denominator is now grouped all together. So if you have the older operating system, it's going to look like this. You got your first part in parentheses, which is your numerator, divided by the second part in the denominator in the group of parentheses, and if you press enter, you're going to get the decimal form, which again, changing it to a fraction, you get the same answer as the new operating system. So really it's knowing the difference of what operating system you're using, okay, and making sure you're using parentheses as much as possible. Okay, so just to recap what we kind of talked about, some highlights here. Make sure you evaluate obviously under the calculator page. I know some students have done under the y equals and try to evaluate it. You need to be under the calculator page, which is where your cursor is blinking. Another key thing is use parentheses whenever possible. I can't stress that enough. For exponents, when you're dividing underneath square roots, try to group that and use parentheses as much as possible. Know the difference between your minus and negative sign, right? Okay, if you did a minus, you'll see that some arrow will pop up. You can try that on your own if you'd like, but know the difference between the two. And the other thing that I really didn't list under here, but remember how to change it from fraction, from decimal to fraction and vice versa. That's another thing you're going to need to know for your Gateway exam. Okay, this concludes our lesson on order of operations, and get ready to practice this stuff tomorrow. You got a little quiz to attempt here. and enjoy the rest of your night.